Hello and welcome to the Social Justice Forum for December 20th, 2020. My name is Jane Martin. I'm a member of the Health Justice team at Westminster, and it's my honor to be the facilitator today. We build the Social Justice Forums around a common theme. And this program year, our theme is Wade in the Water, Becoming Anti-Racist. Every forum we hold this year is meant to encourage all of us to listen intently to voices beyond those of white privilege and to reflect on how we, as a community of faith, can help change a racialized system. The holidays are full of opportunities for joy and peace, but they also can bring sadness and pain. This presentation, entitled Christmas 2020, Mental Health, Racism, and a Global Pandemic, will help address some of those issues. Our guests are from Westminster Counseling Center, where highly trained psychotherapists offer counseling and mental health services. It's located on the second floor of our church, and more information can be found on the Westminster Presbyterian website. So I'm pleased to introduce Carol Hornbeck and Peter Bruhn. Carol is a licensed marriage and family therapist and joined the Westminster Counseling Center in 2019. Carol has 20 years of work experience along with a Master of Arts and is a member of Delta Kappa International Marriage and Family Therapy Honor Society. She has training in Imago relationship therapy and play therapy. She was also a program counselor at Refugee and Immigration Services. Peter is a licensed professional counselor and licensed alcohol and drug counselor who joined the Westminster counseling team in 2016. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Wisconsin, a master's degree in professional studies from the University of Minnesota, which is a degree encompassing both substance abuse counseling and mental health counseling. So a heartfelt thank you to both of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and to offer your expertise. So I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane. So we thought it might be helpful just to start by kind of looking at what some of the major mental and emotional health challenges are that pretty much everybody's been facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic over the year. We work with a lot of people who have acute anxiety or depression, but my thought is that probably pretty much anybody who's walking around, breathing, living is affected by some of the uncertainty and certainly anxiety that have characterized this past year. Would you agree?
And I would, yes, I was just going to say that we can be included in that category as well. Yeah. It's a challenge for everyone, even people who do this kind of work helping others.
I would agree. I think that isolation, people who typically live alone and are kind of disconnected and now deprived of an opportunity to get together with other people, whether in worship or socially. Isolation is a huge challenge, that separation, as well as our disruption of our routine, just all the things we took for granted in terms of how do we connect, have been very difficult this year.
Yeah, and it's in different domains. And we can we have people, our own clients, who are obviously perfect examples. And I think that the people who are watching this or listening to this right now can relate in some way to things that we're seeing, if not experiencing ourselves, particularly people who are living alone right now, cut off from friends, cut off from family, and even their work. For a lot of people, if they're fortunate to stay employed right now, I mean, obviously a lot of people millions have lost their jobs, but those who still have their jobs and can work remotely, that has taken on a completely different feel. for a lot of people, a lot of my clients, the workplace can be a place of camaraderie and connection. It's sort of a built-in family that they have 5 days of the week.
Mm.
And now to be cut off from that is really difficult. I mean, it's one thing to have these Zoom meetings, but it's not the same as working in the same environment, in the same office setting where you can just be spontaneously striking up conversation or updating each other on what's going on in one another's life. Now it's this formal a virtual meeting where it's much more constricting. And so even though many are able to work from home, it's certainly not the same thing. So it's challenging in that way as well.
I think that's true. I also think whether your job has put you on an extended furlough, or, in some cases people have actually lost their jobs, we get a lot from our work in terms of, obviously a paycheck, but structure to our day. And so if you're home all the time now, you have to create that for yourself, which I think sometimes can be very challenging, as well as we get part of our identity from what we do, our job or our profession. And so people are experiencing a sort of alienation in the loss of their identity when they're not working the way they were before.
Sure. And working from home is challenging because sometimes boundaries get a little blurry. It's one thing to have a job where you leave at the end of the day and go back home, but now I have clients who are set up in corners of bedrooms, and clients who are working more than they know they should because their computer taunts them from the other side of the house or room. And so it's much easier to slip into an unhealthy relationship with work, where maybe they are working at hours of the day or evening when they would rather not be and know they shouldn't be, but it's hard to draw the line. And so some of the work I've been doing with people is setting up some boundaries so that they have a distinction between their work day and then their resting R&R hours or family time.
Really important. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, just the general sort of uncertainty, because for people whose jobs have changed or they've lost their work, they may not know how long this is going to last and when they will feel more secure financially and otherwise related to employment.
If we knew, like in the beginning, that what was it, in April, or I think it was April, we all have to shut down for 2 weeks. I think that was the original plan.
Right.
And everyone was running to the grocery store and stocking up on toilet paper and food and whatnot. And we thought, okay, we can nip this in the bud if we hunker down for a couple weeks. And, that's one thing. And now like you said, the uncertainty where there's been this kind of ebb and flow to this, and we think maybe we're out of the woods, and then we're not, and things open up and then they shut down again, and people being laid off or furloughed for a while, they come back to work, furloughed again. We like to have a sense of control over our lives. We want some predictability. It amplifies stress and anxiety when we don't know what's going to happen next. And uncertainty can be very anxiety producing.
Right. And I think
so, yeah.
In terms of difficult experiences, many of us can tolerate something if we know how long it's going to last. Like you're sitting in the dentist chair and the dentist says, okay, I'll just be a couple more minutes. And you think, okay, I can stand it for 2 more minutes, right? But with no end in sight, like how long can you stand it? You have to really wonder about that.
Mm-hmm. And thank goodness the vaccines are starting to roll out now. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
That's right.
But it's hard to know what we will go back to and how those are going to be implemented. That's still up in the air. And when will we go back to normal? There's still uncertainty within all this,
right.
For sure.
So let's talk for a minute about how the challenges we've mentioned are worse for some demographic groups. And specifically, I'm thinking about African American people who've experienced a lot of other anxiety this year. People of color who have challenges with racism that not everybody has. So one of the effects that I think of immediately is African Americans are disproportionately impacted by the virus, by poverty, by a shortage of resources, and by the cumulative effects of culturally shared trauma. So some groups are starting out, at a disadvantage and have fewer resources. If you have the sort of job that you can work at home, that's one thing. But if your job can't be done from home because it's a direct services or something else, and owing to income inequality, I certainly think that's a factor that it's going to be harder to make that transition.
Yeah, along those lines, I actually found an article. This was on Mayo Clinic's website. I thought this was telling and important to share. The article noted a few facts here that Hispanics and African American populations are hospitalized at around 5 times the rate of whites during the pandemic. And 25% versus 16% are essential workers. So they are having to work through this. They oftentimes are living in multi-generational homes. So there's a lot more close contact with one another. And if some are working outside the home and then coming back home again, obviously then the chances of contracting COVID increase. And some, like you said, some don't have the resources, many don't have insurance. They can't afford to take time off from work, literally. So even if they become ill, it may be a situation where if it's a milder case, boy, I'm going to keep working because I have to keep working. Yeah. I really don't have any choice here. And then clearly that contributes to the spread of the virus. So it's a real bind that many find themselves in, and it's extremely unfortunate.
I would agree with that. And I think because of the overlap and disproportionate number of African American, maybe Native American, Hispanic people who also are living in poverty, for their kids to go online, they absolutely have to have access to the devices, reliable Wi-Fi, and probably a parent or another reliable adult at home who can help them with their studies, right? And so if you don't have those things, you're going to probably fall farther behind than children who do have access to those things.
Clearly. Yeah. I mean, imagine, I would assume that people who are tuned into what we're talking about here know what it's like to be working from home and have kids. And if you are fortunate to have 2 parents in the household and can maybe share the duties and tag team, it's probably still pretty difficult. But if that's in place, it makes it perhaps at least doable. And it's not easy. But if, like you said, if there's only one parent, perhaps they have to work. It's a real enormous disadvantage, and it's asking a lot of those families to try to make this work. And especially if you throw in perhaps limited Wi-Fi access, it's almost an impossible task to keep their kids up to speed.
And I think from our perspective as mental health professionals, I have encountered a real inequity in access to the technology that enables us to support people. So if you don't have Wi-Fi, then it doesn't matter if you have a computer, you're not going to be able to meet your therapist on Zoom, right? Maybe you can do a phone session if you have good cell service. But again, that definitely has an effect. And for those parents who are trying to juggle some kind of income activity with helping their kids, they don't have the privacy to do a session with their therapist in their home or anywhere else. So that's a real challenge. And sometimes just being able to talk to somebody can help you hold it together for a while. So the loss of the kind of support that you and I provide, I think, is significant.
It does call for creativity at times. I have clients who are doing sessions in their cars, and maybe you do as well. So we have to kind of think outside the box to make this work from time to time.
Right.
And I wanted to talk a little bit too about extending the conversation about kids and thinking about how they're cut off from their friends, from their peers. I have a client who's a teacher, and she says it's just so much more difficult to try to connect with the student. For some students, school is a real opportunity to grow and connect, and obviously to socialize. For all the kids it is. And so that loss is painful, and for the teachers too. They can't have the same quality, the same experience with their kids when it's done in this format. I think in some schools, the kids don't really have to have their cameras on, or maybe it depends on the teacher or the class. And so they can be kind of checked out. And I think so much of our educators learn a lot about their students by actually watching them in between classes or watching them during downtime.
Right.
Those interactions are so valuable that they observe between peers, and that tells them a lot. And so that whole piece is missing right now. That is part of education and part of support.
Sure.
And that's a real loss right now.
Yeah. And I think about our middle school aged kids who just got to the age where they could have a little more freedom and independence, and now they can't go over to their friend's house. So I see teenagers really struggling with that. And, those are necessary developmental stages that people have to go through to get to the next stage. And so having that barrier, impediment to being able to practice those skills, I think is really problematic. I think there's a lot of things as we approach Christmas that people are feeling real loss around. Obviously getting together with friends, but not being able to go to a restaurant or a concert or worship together. It starts to feel like, how can we have Christmas?
Yes, for many, these are traditions. These are what make it a magical time of year. These are things that we look forward to.
Yeah, I'm missing singing a lot. It's one thing to get an app and put it on your phone and record a piece and then send it to somebody else. But wouldn't it be just so great to just sit down with your hymnal and sing with a bunch of people? And that's not happening.
So it requires creativity again.
Indeed, yeah.
It requires, I think, acknowledgement of that loss. But how can we still enter this season and experience this season in a meaningful way, in a special way? Maybe it's going to be different. Clearly it is for most of us. But what can we still do to make it special.
Yeah, to overcome that sense of just sort of overwhelming deprivation and access some of the joy. I know for my family, like we usually have a number of activities that we do, and like we'll say to each other, okay, so today I went to a concert and I finally got the Christmas spirit, right? Because it's hard to balance that with all the things that we have to do, the decorating and the shopping and the, you know, adjusting the schedules. And so just taking some time to kind of really engage in an activity that feeds us spiritually will sometimes just like put us in that place, like, okay, now I'm ready to celebrate. But you know, as we already said, not having those things, I think we have to be really creative. And I think helping us, you know, as people of faith, one thing we can do to help ourselves is just to kind of reflect on what are the central theological themes. And if we think about the theme of incarnation, you know, the fact that God chose to take human form and come and walk among us and come as a baby, well, it's hard not to kind of make that next step to how we experience the love of God through other people. You know, I do think it's challenging because some people's love languages have been altered by the pandemic. So if spending quality time together is your love language, you know, like Gary Chapman says, that's how I really feel special, is when somebody takes time to be with me. Well, but if you can't be with that person, that's hard. And so one of the things I think is, think about the people who are in your sort of safe pod and maybe put some energy into deepening those connections and those relationships, because those are the people, you know, we can't get together with people outside that group, but we can put more energy into those people that we are with.
It's a great idea. Any suggestions on how we would go about doing that with the people in our bubble or our pod?
Yeah, so one thing I think about is something as simple as decorating our Christmas tree. Like, I don't know how it is for your family, but we've collected a lot of ornaments over the years that tell our story. You know, some of them were given to us by people who are no longer living, you know, our grandparents and great grandparents. And, you know, so making that just an event where we really take the time to reflect on how an ornament represents for us kind of the cloud of witnesses, you know, the saints who've gone before, and how our family life has evolved and what it symbolizes, rather than just kind of getting through it as a thing. We've got to decorate the Christmas tree. Just making it almost like a sacrament to really engage in a really mindful way.
Yeah, I like that, and I relate to what you're saying. I would imagine people who are tuned into this can relate to that as well. We have a couple daughters who are, one's 20 and one is 15. And through the years, when we've done our decorating, it's typically gone, it's a festive time, but we don't linger over each ornament and think about where it came from. Maybe it's done very fleetingly, but that's not really the point. And so maybe this is an opportunity to slow things down and be a little bit more mindful of that experience as one example. And it's not just putting the ornament on the tree. It can be sitting and looking at, I bet most trees are decorated at this point. It can be sitting and looking at this beautiful collection of ornaments. And like you said, each one tells a story. It reflects our journey through life, really. I think typically people have ornaments that they've collected when they've been on trips, or like you said, from other family members or grandparents or parents. And the tree sort of tells a story. And just sitting and gazing at it, and not just, okay, that's done, it's set up, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Really soak it in. It's very symbolic. And if that tree could talk, or if those ornaments could talk, what would they say? What are they telling us? And so turning that into more of a sacred experience or presence in the house
Yeah,
could
and
give more meaning.
while you were talking, I was actually envisioning maybe setting up a chair next to the tree where people could spend some quiet time and just kind of see what came up, and use the Christmas tree almost as a meditation, opportunity.
A chair and maybe a journal. So
And some
as you
Christmas
gaze,
music.
so as you gaze at the tree, what comes to mind? What are you thinking about? What's striking you? What stands out to you? What do you remember about Christmases past?
Yeah. I also think about, one of the themes of Christmas is the unexpected way that God arrived, right? As a baby, when people were looking to the heavens, thinking that God might, their Savior might come in a chariot, with legions of angels to save them. And instead, the kind of surprising story of a baby born in a stable, it also makes me think about how Jesus' ministry was full of unexpected things. And the example that we have from Jesus' life is that as he was interrupted, the Gospels say he was on his way from this place to this place, and suddenly this happened, right? People present themselves and they ask for healing, and they challenge him. And so his ministry also is one of unexpected interruptions and surprises, right? But the thing about Jesus is he doesn't react, he responds. And so if we look at that as an example, I think responding is kind of more intentional and more thoughtful than reacting, right? We think about reactive behavior as being sort of fight or flight behavior, very anxious.
Impulsive.
Yeah, right. And not really thought through. So we've got this huge challenge, and we can choose to respond thoughtfully. And, some of the ways are realizing, well, I can't celebrate in the way that I usually do. What could I do instead? Maybe create some new traditions, just embrace the unexpectedness and use that as a way to kind of make space for Jesus to come this year.
That's a great idea.
Have you thought about any new traditions in your house?
Well, we have. And, I'll start off by saying, in some ways, I don't know how popular this point of view is with others, but in some ways, the Christmas has been kind of a scramble. I won't get into the details for our family. There are some obligations where we need to make sure we spend some time here and do some traveling. And knowing that this is an exception this year, I think we're on track to have a more normal Christmas next year. If these vaccines pan out, I think this may be just a one-time thing. And so because of that, it's an opportunity to have a little bit more control over what we're going to do for ourselves as a family, versus making sure that we that we do this and this and this and visit another family. And in some ways it feels like some pressure is off. It feels a little bit of a relief there. We've always traveled. We've never really been here and at Westminster for Christmas Day and the church service and services. And so clearly that won't be normal this year, but at least we can be here and experience it virtually. We can be in our own home through the holidays. We can have our dinner whenever we want. There's a certain sense of freedom there. So maybe sort of reframing this experience as one of being able to have a little more control and do things a little bit to one's own liking might be actually refreshing. Another thought is that we have some friends in Germany who were inspired by them, because every year they've done this for years, where they get together with their neighbors in somebody's backyard, and they have a big fire, and they get some glühwein going, and they bundle up, and they have this wonderful time with their neighbors, where they're drinking glühwein and having German snacks, and it's a real coming together and a real celebration. Hopefully these mild temperatures will hold. I think the forecast isn't looking all that great for Christmas, but maybe for New Year's it'll be milder. But if you feel adventurous, maybe this is an opportunity to try something different like that, doing something socially distanced, where you have a celebration or a gathering outside, and embrace the bitter cold, embrace maybe a starry night, and share some glühwein or whatever it is you want to do, or share with others. That can be a way to connect people that maybe you wouldn't normally be connecting with at this time of year, but it could be an opportunity to share Christmas stories, and what do you normally do, and what do you normally do? This is what we would normally do in a normal year. But we're all in this together, and we're sharing this unique experience. So those are a couple things that pop into my mind.
Well, I love that reframe, to have less is more. So it's a smaller gathering and a less hectic gathering without extended family. We miss them, but we have a little extra, bandwidth that we can say, okay, how do we want to do this, right? And so that may give rise to some further creativity for some families to think about something that they try, and who knows, that could become a new tradition for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I love the intentionality of that, to pause. It's like the sacred pause, right? And then, is this the way we want to keep doing this?
And I was going to add, from the way we're set up, we're a family of four. It probably seems pretty doable and could be enjoyable, and we'll make the best of it. But for people who are living alone and normally relish that time to connect with their family, this is obviously going to be more challenging. And so another thing to consider is, well, what can we do for other people? And do we have any neighbors or people near us who we know are on their own and are perhaps feeling the sting of this more acutely? And how might we be able to reach out or do something for them at this time of year, to let them know that they're thought of and cared about? And that can take different forms. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's dropping off a gift or some baked goods, or with a card that just lets them know that they're being thought of and that they are cared for.
That sounds really creative, in that so many people leave town for the holidays, right, to be with their extended families who are so spread out. And so if they're not doing that, then it's an opportunity to connect more locally in our neighborhoods and kind of get to know people. And, I saw a lot of that over the summer, right after, George Floyd's death, that neighbors who really hadn't spoken to each other began to band together, and take care of each other, and become more watchful for danger and really support each other, and I think about the people who got out and cleaned up, after all the protests, some of them turned destructive, and people worked together to protect some of the businesses and kind of clean up after the damage. And nobody would have chosen to live through, especially what our city went through. And yet, it was an opportunity for growth and connection that we didn't have before.
That just sparked an idea in my mind. If it's at all possible, maybe on New Year's, a revisiting, a gathering of the people in your neighborhood who you got to know. Because I totally relate to what you were just saying. During that week or those couple weeks, it was an intense time, and we certainly did end up getting to know neighbors in ways we hadn't before, and under these very trying circumstances. So it almost seems like fitting to, at the end of the year, have a gathering outdoors. Just let's get some people together and let's reflect on this year and what we've all been through, and remind ourselves of kind of the silver linings where we came together and we're trying to, not only are we getting to know each other, and not only did we successfully navigate our way through that and support each other, but we're also working in bigger ways to be agents of change, because we were in our neighborhood all on the same page on what needs to happen moving forward as a society. So it would be an opportunity to reconnect and reflect, and sort of acknowledge that work still needs to be done, but to also celebrate that we made it through quite a year.
Yeah, I like that. And I know that for some people, those connections have continued, but probably for others, not so much. And so making that an intentional thing to go back and I was so moved by a group of university students who raised some money, bought a lot of fire extinguishers, and then just started distributing them to people they thought would need them. And, you know, they did the same with food, right? If the grocery store had been, you know, closed because of all of the rioting, that they knew those people wouldn't be able to get food. So then they took food into those neighborhoods. So maybe going back to those places where we made those connections and trying to rekindle those.
And that's a great way to celebrate this season too, by reaching out, by doing volunteer work, by doing work at a food shelf or distributing food. I have a client who does it twice a week, and he lives alone, and he has felt like that's made a big difference in his mental health, his emotional health. We want to feel like our lives have purpose and meaning. And at this time of year, that might feel really good to do something that helps others, serves others. And those opportunities are still out there, even during COVID.
So sometimes when I suggest to people that they get involved in volunteer activities, they say, you know, I'm just too depressed right now. And that makes me think, you know, it's worth saying that we're all feeling a lot of sadness and loss. And I don't think it's good to kind of short circuit that piece. We need to really give voice to our grief, because, you know, when Jesus first came, he was born into a world that was full of suffering and loss. And, you know, in reality, that happens every year. You know, making space for the birth of Christ means acknowledging that we are a broken world and we really need that renewal of God being with us in a very powerful way. You know, Emmanuel, God with us, that we have to embrace our sorrow and our pain in order to open up the space to find joy. And so, you know, it's a process, and we can't just pretend that we're not, you know, really hurting. I think it's Khalil Gibran says, the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. So by being vulnerable to pain, you open up the space to experience the joy.
I like that. And it reminds me of how I handle this at times with clients with pain and loss. I think it also is helpful to accept how we're feeling right now, accept the fact that there's disappointment and loss, maybe some grief over this. If that's what you're feeling, let that be okay. Take that with you rather than shutting down and waiting for it to change before you do something different or before you celebrate the holidays. In essence, coexisting with it. So if I can make, like you were saying, make enough room for it and let that difficult emotion be there, observing it, acknowledging it's there, it doesn't have to define me. It doesn't mean I can't still move forward. I will just take this with me and coexist with it. It's not all that I'm experiencing right now. And sometimes that's a useful task to give someone that they can relate to. And it also reminds me of an exercise that one of our colleagues, Sherry Dunham, had shared with me a while ago, and that's simply finding a stone or some object that is easy to hold and taking everything that's going on inside of you, if there's pain, if there's insecurity, if there's loss, and in essence, transferring it to this stone. So if this stone or whatever you're holding is taking on all of that pain, how would you treat that stone, knowing how it feels? And typically the response is, well, I would care for this. I would hold it. I would comfort it. And so it's a nice exercise in getting in touch with what we're feeling and what do I need right now. And maybe I can do some self-soothing, and maybe that can be therapeutic and allow me to move forward.
I like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for creating new practices that address kind of what we're feeling right now. If there were ever a year that it made sense to attend more to our feelings, this is it. So one suggestion I have is that families, couples, even individuals add a movie like Inside Out to their Christmas movies, right? Because it's a movie about emotions, and it sort of anthropomorphizes the emotions, but it gives everybody a common experience so that they can more easily talk about their feelings.
I'll put that on my list. I haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's a fun movie. Yeah.
I have a friend who is going to be alone on Christmas because her husband is working and her kids have moved out of the house, and she is thinking, okay, I'm going to do a Christmas movie-thon. And so was looking for suggestions on what are the best heartwarming Christmas movies that maybe I haven't seen yet. And so she did this on posted this out on Facebook and was getting a lot of feedback. So yeah, maybe she'll discover something that's going to be a new tradition. Hey, we have to watch this every year because it's so lovely and heartwarming. And there are more films out there than maybe just It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah. I know for some families, the whole tradition of gift giving is kind of anxiety producing. And now I think that's partly because of the families that people came from, and in some families there's like too much emphasis on gifts, and maybe it's competitive, and maybe you grew up in a family where there wasn't enough money to really buy the presents that people wanted, and so it can be very emotional. But I think, again, doing things differently, kind of taking charge of that process and deciding maybe we don't buy people one more thing that they don't need in our family. Maybe we kind of reduce our gift giving budget and take some of that money and give it to an organization that's fighting racism, to kind of continue that commitment to our work. Concentrate on small Black-owned businesses rather than buying gifts from a big bookstore. It just kind of can be really creative in expressing what's really important to us as an outgrowth of that increased awareness that we can't do things the same way. So let's make different really special.
make it really count.
Mhm.
And along those lines, even putting together a little gift bag of items that maybe somebody who is experiencing homelessness
Mhm.
right now could use. My daughter had done that with her church group. The kids put together these bags that had chapstick and deodorant and granola bars and little care package to hand out when you come to a stoplight or a stop sign and there's someone in need. And what a wonderful way to make a small difference. And those are things that we can do at any time, but especially right now, it might feel really good.
Those are great.
Mm.
Great. Um, I'd like to jump in with just a couple of questions. Someone was wondering about all of the difficulties around travel right now and how lots of people have different ideas about what should and shouldn't be done. And the question is how to deal with the judgment that you might get from other people around your decision to travel or not travel.
I think that's a great question. To me, it's about increasing our capacity to deal with anxiety, you know, that we all have to do what we feel is the safest. And in some cases, that's going to mean dealing with some conflict in our families. Conflict isn't a bad thing. It's an opportunity for growth. And you know, I like the idea of telling extended family, I care too much about you to take a risk. And I really believe it's a risk. And, you know, I would rather we be conservative and choose not to travel and we're all around next year to see each other.
Thank you so much. And then someone else was wondering how some people are behaving in ways that are difficult to be around because they're experiencing so much stress. How can we hold more space for empathy while also trying to manage our own grief?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one thing is just to remind ourselves that we don't know what somebody else has experienced and what is the toll that that's taken on their resources and their ability to adapt. Some of us have more resilience than others because we received more nurturing earlier in our lives and more empathy. And so I generally find that when people are behaving in ways that are really difficult to deal with, underneath their annoying or frustrating behavior, they're really wounded. And so when I remind myself of that, it helps me access more empathy and patience for them.
And I think a useful exercise sometimes with having to deal with difficult people, or if there's someone in our life who is making it hard for us, it's very easy to just kind of react to that person. And it kind of goes back to what Carol was talking about earlier when responding versus reacting, and taking a little time to, I mean, knowing that you're going to be with this individual and there's no way around it. One thing you can control is how you're going to behave, and giving some thought to how do I want to show up in this relationship today, and maybe even anticipating what might happen or how this person might react to X, Y, or Z, and sort of priming yourself to respond in a way that you're going to be pleased with, and that might ultimately make your interactions more successful, rather than oftentimes engaging in perhaps default ways of behaving that don't really serve anyone very well. Oops, I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. And our guests have some excellent resources for us that we're going to be posting as well in case things do become just too overwhelming. And quite work through it on your own. So thank you so much for that. I think that's all the questions we have so far. So I'll let you guys get back to what you were saying.
Sure. Thank you. What were we just saying? I think we were talking about, yeah, some ways where we can maybe make a difference in helping others or reaching out to others.
So one family that I know has decided to purchase gift certificates to all of the small businesses that each family member gets to pick one. And, what is the small business that you hope doesn't go out of business this year? And so then you purchase a gift certificate, but the idea is I won't redeem it until next summer. And so it's like giving the business, some extra money because they don't have to let go of any inventory in exchange for that. So just knowing that, we're helping, even in small ways, to bolster the economy with our gift giving, or just
Sure.
buying locally, and as I said before, like Black-owned businesses and businesses that are particularly at risk. That just feels like a step that we can take.
Yeah, businesses that are on potentially thin ice right now. We've been doing that as well throughout the year, or the last 8 months, picking small restaurants we get takeout from that we want to see continue, neighborhood places that are minority owned. So that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, what's unfortunate about our format here is if we were in a room with everyone, we could be, because I'm sure you and I are not the only people doing this. And I'm sure people who are listening to us have been doing these things, have been thinking along these lines. And we're at a disadvantage because I'd love to get inspiration from others, which I'm sure we could receive right now, because I'm sure other people are creative with this and taking steps and doing things to make a difference.
Yeah, so I hope one thing that people take from our conversation, and I know I'm taking it, just hearing how you approach it, is the key to getting through this challenge is really just embracing the difference rather than resisting it. So much of it is about, as you just said, choosing how we're going to respond. That just feels so powerful in terms of how we deal with anxiety and challenges.
Yeah, if we can accept this situation, then there's some diminishing of struggle, of suffering. So if we can accept it and work with it rather than shaking our fist at it and wishing it were different, we're probably going to be a lot more successful getting through this in a healthy, satisfying, meaningful way.
Right.
Yeah, and just acknowledging that the only thing that any of us can control is our own behavior and what comes out of our mouth. But could you maybe give us some ideas of example sentences of what to say to people who we care about, but who are really just difficult to be around at the moment? So just maybe some sample sentences of how to communicate with them in a way that's respectful and loving, but still with healthy boundaries.
Well, one of the things I think is helpful is just to take a deep breath so that you don't kind of escalate the situation and react in a way that that I think will make things worse. And taking a time out, and saying, like, this conversation is not feeling productive to me. I'm going to take some space because I really care about our relationship, and I don't want to say something that I'll regret. Sometimes being that direct can communicate to another person that you're really struggling not to escalate, but you're calling on all your resources to pause, like we said before, the sacred pause.
And maybe too, asking the individual, what do you think would help? Because maybe what's going on the surface is a symptom of something else. And so
Mhm.
maybe getting them to pause and saying, well, I'm hearing this and this, but what are you really saying? Or what do you think could really help right now? And then
Yeah,
maybe it takes things in a different direction. And then you can decide, well, is that doable? Is that something I can do or needs to be done by me? But maybe it changes the direction of the conversation a bit.
right. And what I heard you say there was also just reflecting. If we can't validate the other person's experience, we can always be curious about it. Because
Mhm.
usually when people are angry and feel like they're pushing us away, you're right, underneath is something else. And if we can
Mhm.
speak to the something else, then that will diffuse the situation.
Mhm. Right, because oftentimes what's being said isn't maybe necessarily what's being meant,
Or
or
being
it's
felt.
or being felt.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So maybe having to go below that layer
Mhm.
to get at the heart of something.
Great question. I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are dealing with conflict right now.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Because if not, I don't know how you feel, Carol, but I'm thinking that we've kind of gone through everything that we wanted to share.
Yeah, it's
Does
been
that sound
great
right?
to have an opportunity to talk about this stuff. It just feels very empowering.
Well, Carol and Peter and Jane, also for your support. Thank you all very much. This, I think, has given us all some good food for thought, and we greatly appreciate the efforts and certainly encourage people to contact the Counseling Center if they wish to explore matters further. Just for in terms of what's coming next on the social justice forums, we will take a bit of a pause during the holiday season and resume on January 3rd. And we're going to pick up a series on mental health and public safety at that time. So we look forward to seeing you all then.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you. And I might just add, if there's a moment, that the Counseling Center is not limited to just people who go to Westminster Presbyterian
Right.
Church. And I think sometimes there's a misconception or misperception that we're just here to serve people at Westminster, but we are open to the public. And so, and we have sliding fee scale. We have ways to help people if they feel that, even if they're feeling like there's a financial barrier to getting help, we try to work with everyone to make sure that they are assisted in any way we can.
Right.